Okay, on the topic of the inner child work and managing inner child emotions. So this person has asked us, I would like advice on how to compassionately contain my inner child. I'm currently doing self-development work in this area, so they're already doing some inner child work. And I often find it, I find it hard not to feel very emotional at inappropriate times. Welcome to our Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons series. In each episode, we answer your questions, reveal the powerful life lesson, and offer you lots of practical tips and advice to help you live in balance, harmony, and flow.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions there. And the first thing, just listening to that question for the first time, that made me stand up is contain. Is she's trying to contain her child. You can't contain your child. Remember, the label of the inner child is describing a part of your mind. That's your mind that's almost like frozen and stuck with an issue it can't solve. Trying to contain it will fight against that, because you're adding coal onto fire. Is already contained, it's already stuck. What it really wants is to be free. That's really what it wants. It wants emotional freedom. It's fed up of being in the prison of worrying about what other people think, trying to compare themselves, worried about being criticized, worried about being judgmental. The worst thing that you can do is to contain your inner child. The whole teaching of Wu Wei wisdom is to release your inner child, is to let your inner child and you come together in this oneness. This is the basis. So do not try and contain.
So if containing or boxing off or trying to put a compassionate lid,
or ignoring
on the inner child is one extreme. If letting the inner child run riot at all times, appropriate, inappropriate when you're at work, so that you're crying, you're getting angry, you're letting the inner child express all its emotions all of the time, that is equally inappropriate.
That's just what I was going to come to. You see, when remember every video we talk about
this energy swinging,
the yin yang of the energy swinging. So when you're trying to contain the child, which is what the child will absolutely hate, then it will be like any child. It'll go wild, as Alex says, and it'll go the other way at inappropriate times. And that's why you can get angry, have temper tantrums, cry, sulk, whatever you want to call it. It's just the other extreme of this. So why don't you listen to your inner child, listen to what he or she is saying, and then after you've listened, build up a conversation. Build up this way that you're talking and looking and finding the issues, not the top issues, the froth, the things that he just moans and groans about, or she moans and groans about. You're going deeper and you're trying to resolve the core problems. Remember, there will only be 2, 3, 4 core problems. It'll normally be about unfairness or injustice. It will normally be about being compared. It will normally be something about the 3 lies we talk about. I'm not good enough. I can't cope. I'm unlovable. So it will normally, once you've got through the froth, you will normally be dealing with that. And those are the issues you have to resolve. Resolving those issues will give you emotional freedom. Trying to contain your child, not communicate with your child, and not. So a lot of people who come to me who've done some inner child work, they're very good at communicating, but they haven't resolved the problems. In fact, they almost leave. They think the job is done when they've communicated. The job isn't just starting as when you communicate. What you're trying to find is to find those life lessons that the child doesn't want to learn, doesn't understand, is rejecting, is blocking off. That's where the real work takes place, finding that core life issue. That's why the golden thread is so important. Why? Why do you say that? Why do you think this? Why? And that leads you down the golden thread, because down in this golden thread, you've got an absolutely beautiful child that's emotionally stuck and needs some emotional education. And that's your role to do that.
Okay, David, I understand what you're saying. We need to listen to our inner child, not ignore it or try to box it off.
Yeah, communicate.
So let my child speak.
Yes.
If I'm at work, and obviously I've got to be professional, if my inner child comes up and starts having a temper tantrum or getting very upset about something at a time when it's just not appropriate, and what do I do? What do I do in that situation?
Well, yes. Well, it's all according to what stage you are. If you haven't done the work previously, it's then extremely difficult to deal with a child. But once you start to build up the relationship with a child, you say to the child, we will deal with this at an appropriate time. Yeah. We will deal with this later, tomorrow. Yeah. And the key, the number one thing I cannot emphasize enough is don't say you're going to deal with it and then you don't deal with it. You've got to have that honesty, integrity, that truthfulness. You've got to deal with the core issue. Yeah. Because if you don't, the child will come up and rear her head at the times because she wants attention. Yeah. She's screaming for attention. She wants you, and she knows that if she comes up at the wrong time, you have to then give her attention. And that's why she does that.
Because I think often the times when the inner child is triggered, when a belief, an inauthentic belief that the inner child is still holding on to is triggered by something that's happening, whether it's a relationship situation or a situation at work, it might not be, it's just not going to be appropriate in that moment to have the inner child blasting off full kind of blown communication. But if you acknowledge and then acknowledge that this has triggered you, this has triggered us, and then almost act as a parent and say, now this is not the appropriate time. It's a bit like the parent taking the child down the sweet aisle in the supermarket. If the child gets triggered by all the sweets, that's not, and is screaming and having a tantrum, that's not necessarily the appropriate time to have a full-blown conversation with the child in the middle of the supermarket. But it's certainly something to be dealt with once you get home and addressed and sit down with the child and speak to them lovingly and compassionately.
And that's why the question is so good, really, because that's going to take a process, not long, a week or 2 weeks, because that part of your mind that we're labeling the inner child has got to build up that trust that you are going to address the issue. Because when the child kicks off and you start to cry or you start to have a temper tantrum or whatever, if you think about it, really all the child is doing, the child wants attention. Like any child that kicks off, the child wants attention and wants its own way. And so if you say right at the beginning, stop, it's not going to listen to you. So you have to do the process. And you must do that process every day, even when the child is not kicking off. So whether that's through meditation, morning papers, riding a bike, swimming, whatever it is, you must listen to that child, that part of your mind, because remember, the inner child is you. There's no other person. It's not floating around outside of you. Yeah. We're just giving it a label that's useful because that part of the mind does act a little bit childlike. And it works. Treat it like a child. And the child wants attention, wants understanding, wants education, wants to know how to deal with the difficulties. So you can't expect, well, I've got this now, I'm going to click my fingers, it's going to happen the next day. Because one of the most important things the child has to do is to build up trust in you. What you say, you will do. Do not ever let it down. You must do it. If you've promised, you must go and do it.
And for me, the essence of this is that the adult part of our psyche has to hone its parenting skills. You have to begin to parent your child. inner child work is not just allowing your inner child to express itself any which way at any point in time, whether it's appropriate or not. Inner child work is allowing the child to express, beginning communication, but also learning the parenting skills to put in the compassionate self-discipline that is when is required.
And that self-responsibility, compassionate self-discipline, here's the Wu way, finding the center line. If you go back to the pendulum, we don't want the child up there and we don't want the child up there. We want her or him in her flow, being authentic, being truthful, being loving, looking and getting her intention correct and living her life in the most awesome, strong, positive way that they can possibly live. And that's what you can do using the label of the inner child. It's a very powerful label. It allows you to speak for the first time for yourself. You don't need anyone else. I sometimes recommend to my clients to see if you can find a picture of yourself at about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and imagine you're talking to her. You know her because that was you. What would you wanted to have heard then? And then say that to her. Say that to her because you've got to convince her that she's not separate. We're not warring. We're not fighting. We're coming together as one. We will be a team. We will work together as a team. And that's what you've got to convince her. But she's been let down and she's been disappointed and she's been ignored in the past. And you've got to convince her that that's changing going forward now.
Great. Thank you, David. And so if this particular inner child question and the topics we've discussed around the inner child and being the parent resonates with you, please comment below with any questions you have and we'll be happy to answer them for you.